So for today's agenda, just to run through what the session is going to look like, we're going to keep it to the hour. And yeah, we have first speaker will be Mark Price. Mark is the co-chair of the Irish Anti-War Movement and the founding member of the Irish Neutrality League. Following Mark will be Niamh Bhriain, who's the programme coordinator for War and Pacification at the Transnational Institute, which is a research and advocacy institute. Niamh also holds a master's degree in law in international human rights and is a member of the Swords to Ploughshares movement. After that, we'll have a Q&A session, so you can leave us questions in the chat. Jacob is manning the chat room, or you can raise your hand with the Zoom React and we'll unmute you. We might be caught for time on that, so we will try and keep questions to 20 seconds each. Then we'll do a real action session and show what you can do right now today to make a real impact and make sure that there is no changes made to the triple lock or to Ireland's neutrality. Government formation talks are happening this week, so now is the time to really take action, and we have a phone action that we can all do together to kind of flood Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil's phone lines this week and make sure that they get the message clear that no changes are to be made to our neutrality. And then we'll finish up with Mark and Niamh's kind of closing comments and some final responses. As I said, we'll look to keep to the hour. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Mark Price.
Thanks, Bhriain. So first of all, I'm going to explain the triple lock, what it is. So the triple lock was a pledge made by the government to the Irish people in order to get them to vote yes to the second Nice Treaty in 2001. Okay, the people had voted no to the first Nice Treaty because they feared it would lead to military integration with Europe. And so the government promised that if they voted yes second time around, Irish military participation in foreign missions would thereafter require approval of the government, the Dáil and the UN. This promise was repeated before the Lisbon Treaty of 2009. The effect of this is to limit Irish military participation to UN peacekeeping missions, because apart from self-defence, the only justification for military force under the UN Charter is to keep the peace. Now the government is planning to tear up that solemn promise. In September last year, it was announced that 174 Irish Defence Force personnel will participate in a so-called European battle group in 2025. This is after successive attacks on the triple lock by politicians and their friends in the media, in particular by Micheál Martin. He argues that the triple lock is no longer fit for purpose because the Russian threat means that we shouldn't allow the UN to restrain our foreign policy. Both, he says, because Russia is allegedly threatening Europe and because of Russia and China's possible veto on peacekeeping missions at the UN Security Council. Niamh, after I'm finished, will show you why his arguments don't even remotely stand up. Here I want to explain why the triple lock is so important in the first place. The reason why Irish people rejected the first Nice Treaty is that we overwhelmingly support our neutrality, but our elected officials appear to do what they're told by others. For example, there is widespread disgust that successive governments have allowed Shannon Airport to be used as a facility by the US military, yet ministers allow it to continue due to secret pressure from the Americans. We know from WikiLeaks that when the Catholic workers activists were acquitted in 2006 after damaging a US warplane in Shannon, the Minister for Justice was summoned to the US Embassy and read the Riot Act. Last year, when there were reports of military equipment being sent to Israel, the Transport Minister felt he had to be seen to do something in response to public outrage. Yet the inspections regime which Eamon Ryan announced was vague and uncommitted. This attachment of Irish people to neutrality must go back to the fact that before we got our independence, in 1914, the most prominent politician of the day, John Redmond, sold us out to the British war machine on a promise of home rule. Over 200,000 Irishmen went off to fight the First World War on the side of the British against the Germans, and almost 50,000 were killed. This pointless sacrifice to an inter-imperial proxy war soon came to be seen for what it was. We look back at the propaganda of 1914 about defending priests in Catholic Belgium from the heathen Germans and recognise it as pure imperialist warmongering. Redmond was on the wrong side of history then, And we now accept that James Connolly was completely right to refuse to support the so-called just war. Yet even last Saturday week, the 4th of January 2025, the Irish Times, main outlet of propaganda in 1914, was at it again with a major piece recounting Russian evildoing in Ukraine. Lara Marlowe unquestioningly passed on official Ukrainian propaganda. And just as in 1914, as always with the Irish Times, this neatly supports the government's agenda. Martin's scaremongering to undermine neutrality focuses on what he calls Russian aggressive imperialism, with particular emphasis on undersea cables and cybersecurity. But we should look instead to how our tradition of neutrality, which began with Wolfe Tone and Connolly, was carried on by Frank Aiken in the 1950s and 60s. Then, against considerable opposition in the government from Sean Lemass, who wanted us to side with the Americans, Aiken held firm to our neutrality in order to promote nuclear non-proliferation treaties and peacekeeping missions. This was made possible because Ireland had maintained at least an officially neutral position during World War II. The result was an honourable tradition of UN peacekeeping, of which Irish people can be justifiably proud. Instead of fanning the threats from Russia, our leaders should be campaigning on the international stage for a peace deal in Ukraine. And instead of just making statements about the genocide in Gaza, they should be refusing US military use of Shannon Airport, because the Gaza genocide can only happen with American support. These are the concrete, practical steps which our neutrality demands that we take, based on our Constitution and its stated adherence to international law and the peaceful resolution of disputes. Instead, Martin and others want us to abandon international law and take sides in proxy wars. Our neutrality allowed us to be an honest broker on the international stage in the past, with an influence far beyond any military power we might ever have. Finally, the key to all this is democracy, and getting our elected representatives to act according to the wishes of the people. We can see how they respond to mass support for Palestine, at least in their statements, if not actions, and we need to get them to do the same for our neutrality. We know that they are under pressure from the Americans, as we saw on the WikiLeaks example above, and as we saw again recently when the American ambassador threatened consequences if the Occupied Territories Bill was enacted. But we can't just let our politicians do what Americans and European ministers tell them and ignore us, just as Martin did when he backed down after the American ambassador threatened him over the Occupied Territories Bill. It's up to us to make it impossible for people like Micheál Martin to take his orders from foreign leaders and not from we, the Irish people. We have to hold him democratically accountable for selling us out. And the first thing to do is demand that he keeps the triple lock. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Just for anyone who's joined late, I do just want to take a moment to reshare the results of our national polling. Sorry, I'm just sharing the wrong screen here. This is related, but not what I meant. So Uplift members have all chipped in to, and many of you on the call, I assume, have chipped in to fund a national polling done by Ireland Thinks. We just got the results of it today, and it shows that, so the question asked was, should Ireland maintain its current policy on neutrality? And you can see there that an overwhelming 75% of people have said yes, that they want to maintain our current policy on neutrality as it is. There's a typo here, so there was 17% who said no and 7% who said not sure. That I need to fix that, but that was a poll done on over 1,200 people, and you can see across all age groups there's overwhelming support for maintaining our neutrality as it is, and interestingly as well across all political parties. So voters from Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, right across the spectrum, vast majority all agree that we should keep our neutrality as it is, which goes to show, like we've been saying, that it is just a very small number of political leaders who are trying to change this, and as Mark highlighted, they do not have a mandate for that. The people of Ireland have overwhelmingly supported our neutrality for a long time, and it's something we're very proud of, and it's something that we want to see continued. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our second speaker, who is Niamh Bhriain. Niamh is the head of, is the program coordinator for war and pacification at the Transnational Institute, and she's also a member of the Swords to Ploughshares Action Group. Niamh, if you'd like to take over.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Bhriain. And thanks to everyone at Uplift for holding this very important event. I think it's, for many of us who've been talking about the triple lock for a long time and getting questioned about what is that triple lock? Why do you keep talking about it? It's great to see that there's hundreds of people who registered and also many joining, and many more who will have received the notification even if they couldn't make it today. And yeah, I think as Mark said, the only way we're really going to manage to stop this is if we really get mass kind of movement from the people. Because I think it's important to remember the only reason we got the triple lock in the first place, and it was a win for the people, was because we mobilized around calling for neutrality and to call for our neutrality to be protected, and that it wouldn't be at risk because of us buying into these European treaties. So I think it's important to have so many people online, and it's great that there's so many people interested in saving the triple lock. So what I was going to talk about was maybe the government has decided to ignore us, not to enter into debate about the triple lock. They have decided to push this through, hoping that either people will lose interest along the way, or they'll be so overwhelmed or lost in the nitty-gritty of what the triple lock is that they will just simply lose us and they'll be able to continue with their agenda. There's no good arguments for getting rid of the triple lock. So all of the government's arguments that are put forward are very easily debunked. And the government is relying on confusing us or misleading us or bringing in disingenuous argumentation in order to push through the erasure of the triple lock. So I want to mention 4 of the arguments that the government generally tends to raise, and then kind of point out why these arguments don't hold water. And then I'll finish up a bit with the context that we're moving in at the moment, which is extremely concerning. So the first argument that you usually hear is that we need to remove the triple lock, because if we don't, authoritarian regimes like Russia or China, they always mention Russia or China, and most recently they've started mentioning Trump, have a veto over where Irish troops would be deployed. So this is always the idea that the permanent members of the Security Council can veto where Irish peace troops or Irish peacekeepers are deployed. And that is a completely disingenuous way of framing the way the United Nations works. So it is true, there is a possibility to veto within the Security Council. Those of us who have been following events around Palestine are very aware that you can very easily, if you're a P5 member, permanent 5 member, you can veto within the Security Council. That's true. But to put that argument forward and say that because of that, then Ireland should remove our legislative commitments to the UN and deploy troops without a UN mandate is extremely concerning. Because if you imagine then the context in which Ireland would be deploying troops if there were no UN mandates would be in the context of, for example, a European Union mission, which the government has no mandate to actually send Irish troops on. So the only reason that we get this constant kind of we need to remove the triple lock because it means that China and Russia have a veto over where we would send our troops is completely disingenuous. The UN works in that way. We've signed up to the UN Charter, and these are the regulations within the United Nations. And so to put them forward in this very disingenuous, very misleading way, as if somebody is sitting in Moscow or sitting in Beijing or sitting now in Washington saying we're going to veto Irish troop participation in this mission, is completely misleading and completely disingenuous. Moreover, it's actually never happened. The triple lock has been in place, as Mark pointed out, since Nice 2 was being put forward again. There has never been a situation. There was one situation before the triple lock existed where China vetoed a peacekeeping mission to a small nation called the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. And so Ireland couldn't participate in that mission. But that's the only occasion where any permanent member has vetoed a peacekeeping mission. So this is really important to remember that this is not something that's happening every day. And if the triple lock weren't in place, Ireland could be sending its troops to all sorts of peacekeeping missions around the world. That's not the situation. It's actually only ever happened once. It was in the 90s, and it was before the triple lock even existed. The second reason that the government will often mention is don't conflate neutrality with the triple lock. And this is actually laughable, because in Fianna Fáil's manifesto for government, in the previous manifesto for the 2020 elections, Fianna Fáil did exactly that. It said it would protect the triple lock and neutrality. And there's videos of Micheál Martin in the Dáil saying that the triple lock is a core component of our neutrality. So you can find a whole stream of videos, statements from Fianna Fáil going way back saying that the triple lock, it was the Fianna Fáil government under Bertie Ahern who brought in the triple lock, saying that the triple lock is a core component of our neutrality. Now we're being told, oh, hold on, don't conflate the triple lock with neutrality. Those are completely separate things. If we remove the triple lock, our neutrality will be just fine. But if you put that to the test, again, like I said, if you remove the triple lock, which would permit Irish troops to be sent on missions without UN authority, what sort of missions are you actually talking about? And why would Ireland have any business going on a mission that didn't have UN authority? If we take, for example, the recent situation in Lebanon, where Irish troops were coming under fire from Israeli military, the legitimacy that Irish troops had being there was because we had a UN mandate. We had blue helmets. We were part of an international mission that had support within the United Nations. Can you imagine a situation where we remove the triple lock, we send our troops abroad, we don't have international mandate, we don't have legitimacy? What business would Irish troops have on any mission? And also for the families of the troops that were overseas in Lebanon, the fact that they could say our loved ones are in Lebanon with the backing of the United Nations, and we're relying on the United Nations to respond in this situation and get them out of this tight corner that they're stuck in right now, with they're under fire from Israel. The fact that you have an entity like the United Nations brings a huge amount of legitimacy. Also, to try and remove the triple lock at a time, basically, when the United Nations is literally under fire, the United Nations is being discredited and being disregarded. It's being torn up and ripped apart by Israel. So really, for Ireland to decide that now is the time that we should also then revoke our legislative and political commitments to the United Nations is really not a good look for a nation that prides itself on its peacekeeping and its neutrality. The third reason the government will give is that the triple lock is not fit for purpose. Again, what purpose is it not fit for? It's not fit for sending Irish troops on missions unless they have a UN mandate. Again, what business would any troops have on a mission that doesn't have a UN mandate? But the government will often then kind of muddle things, and suddenly you'll find that they're telling you something about an undersea cable. So suddenly you're talking about the deployment of Irish troops, and the next thing is you're being told about undersea cables being destroyed by the Russians, or suspicious activity of ships in the Irish Sea or Irish coastal waters. And the message there is as if the seas were this kind of unregulated body where no law is in operation, and it's kind of the Wild West and everyone is doing everything they can and that Ireland should somehow then remove our commitment to the United Nations because there's ships in our waters that we might not necessarily know about. When in fact the oldest form of law that's known in legal books going back centuries is the laws of the sea. And everything in the sea, there's a specific part of maritime law that actually deals with undersea infrastructure. So this is already, significantly legislated for. We don't need to abandon our commitment to the United Nations, and on deployment of our troops to somehow protect undersea cables. Those things are completely unrelated. Then they say, well, what about evacuating Irish people if, for example, what happened in Afghanistan, if, for example, what happened in Sudan, we need to evacuate Irish troops. That's a separate issue. The Triple Lock deals with the deployment of Irish troops on missions, on peacekeeping missions. If you want to evacuate Irish people from overseas, that's a different matter. The Triple Lock doesn't even need to be engaged for those kinds of evacuations. And then the final thing we hear about often is the cyber attacks, the HSE cyber attack. Again, completely nothing to do with the deployment of troops overseas. But this is kind of, the government will throw in all of these questions around threats, apparent threats to Ireland, when in fact Ireland is one of the safest places on earth. To scare us into thinking, oh, well, we better get rid of that triple lock so we can, deploy our troops someplace overseas, and that would somehow protect us at home. And then the final argument, because I think my time is probably coming to an end, the final argument is we're constantly told, well, we need to deal with the world as it is now. And if we, and I think that we have very good examples from our history, and Mark mentioned those, where, in the height of the Cold War, where we had, nuclear potential heating up to nuclear confrontation, we had an Irish person, Frank Aiken, who managed to move through a non-nuclear proliferation treaty. So we can take a very active stance when we're neutral. So if we look at the world as it is now, yes, let's look at the world as it is now. We have the normalization of genocide in Gaza. We have a war that's going on in Ukraine. We have, war and conflict all over the world. We have a European Union that is hell-bent on militarizing any way and every way possible, and it is currently talking about deploying troops to Ukraine in an apparent peacekeeping mission or battle group. So in that context, as the world is now, what business would Ireland have revoking the triple lock, freeing up our troops who, instead of participating in peacekeeping missions under a UN flag, would potentially then be participating in European Union battle groups and being sent off to war? And as I think, and I'll finish with this, as Bhriain showed us, the Irish people don't want that. So in fact, what we have when we look at the triple lock, it really sheds light on, this is a democratic crisis. It's a constitutional crisis if you think that we brought in the triple lock in the context of referendums. It's also a legal crisis. It's a political crisis. And so, I think that we can, if we anchor our calls for Irish neutrality in the triple lock, it's really just a bare minimum. Everything that's happening now is happening in the context of the triple lock being in place. I think I'll end there, Bhriain, but maybe there's questions and comments in the chat, but I'll leave it there for now.
No, that's brilliant. Thanks very much to both Mark and Niamh. So we'll run into a Q&A session now, and we'll have closing comments in again at the end. If people want to put their questions either in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we can come to you. Please do keep your question to within 10 or 20 seconds. We don't want to run over time. And I know there's probably a lot of people on the call who have a wealth of knowledge, but if you want to just keep it to a short question for Mark or Niamh right now, that'd be great. I can see one hand up there, Martin O'Sullivan. Jacob is going to keep an eye on the chat if people want to type messages in there as well. Martin, I'll unmute you here if you want to ask.
Martin, when you're ready.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that we need to start building some sort of movement on this, and I think the best thing to do would be to link in with the Palestine movement. I know Mark Price from working with him in the Irish anti-war movement, but I think we need to build a movement that campaigns on this. For example, we can't have government saying we don't have enough money for healthcare, housing and education, and yet we have enough money to send troops off to war. On the undersea cables, it's interesting, Finland arrested a ship for destroying an undersea cable, and it was just dealt with as a criminal matter. They didn't send their army in, they just sent the police in and arrested the ship for dragging its anchor for about 60 kilometers across the ocean floor. Now, we don't know why the ship did that, but the ship was arrested, and they didn't need to send in troops or bomb the thing. They were just able to deal with it as a police matter. So I think there's a huge amount of scaremongering, and why would we drop our neutrality now if we didn't drop it at the height of a Cold War? And the very final point is, I do have an issue with the way Irish troops are deployed in UN peacekeeping missions. If, for example, you look at the Irish troops, they're always deployed on the, let's say, lesser side of the conflict's border. For example, in Lebanon, the Irish troops are on the Lebanese side of the border, not on the Israeli side of the border, which does kind of send a message that, oh, you know, we think one side is better than the other, and we're protecting one side from the other. Whereas I think the Irish troops should be deployed on the border rather than, you know, on one side of the border. Particularly with Lebanon,
Thanks
they
for that,
always
Martin.
put them on the Israeli side, or
Thanks
sorry,
for
on the
that.
Lebanese side.
Thanks, I
Thanks.
appreciate the points. I'll jump to Niamh and Mark in a second. I just want to take one more question here in the comments from Sinead Hayes, which is how is the EU battle group allowed under our constitution? So I don't know, Mark or Niamh, if either of you want to make a response to either Martin's points or to Sinead's question on how is the EU battle group allowed under our constitution.
Well,
Yeah, Mark, you can go ahead.
well, in law, well, in the Constitution, Article 28 says we can't participate in a war without the assent of the Dáil. And so that's, I think, the extent of the Constitution in relation to participation in a war. I think, but Niamh, you might know better. And then the Triple Lock adds to that the requirement of the UN thing. Niamh, am I correct?
Yeah, so in the Constitution it says war shall not be declared, and there's also, and except with the assent of the Dáil, and there's also a commitment to the ideal of peace or the resolution of disputes in a peaceful manner in the Constitution. But I think what the way the government spins it is that, well, these battle groups haven't been deployed, and that's why they want to get rid of the triple lock. So the way they spin it at the moment is Irish troops have participated in battle group training exercises. So before Christmas, Irish troops were in Germany. I think it was 172 troops. I could be wrong on that figure, but Irish troops were deployed to Germany before Christmas to participate in an EU battle group training exercise. They can't be deployed if there was tomorrow a battle group sent to Ukraine, for example. Irish troops would not be allowed to go because of our triple lock. So that's why the triple lock is so important, and this is why the government is so hell-bent on getting rid of it, because they see it as an embarrassment. We're very embarrassing in Brussels, you know, as a people. We really embarrass the Irish establishment because we actually want peace. I mean, look at the way our president, Michael D. Higgins, who, you know, he was very clear on calling out the military spending. He's been torn to shreds internationally as though he had no idea what he was talking about, when he simply said, how can we spend, you know, over $2.3 trillion on weapons when there's people starving? And I think that goes to the first point that, you know, if you look at the government, we haven't seen the program for government because it doesn't exist yet, but if you look at the manifestos that the different parties put out, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are both advocating for an increase in military spending at a time when in Limerick Hospital, I'm from Clare, so, you know, if you're sent from Clare into Limerick Hospital, you could be on a trolley for days. And that's the reality if you're living in Clare, for example. You could be on a trolley for days. Housing, you can't buy a house hardly anywhere in the country unless you're a millionaire at this point. You know, like, this is the reality. You can't have a house, you can't have a hospital bed, but we're going to increase our military spending because of this apparent threat to Ireland. And if we don't, then we're seen as letting down the side. We're not taking seriously our responsibilities. And yeah, maybe just on the deployment of UN peacekeeping missions, I suppose it's important to say the UN isn't without its problems, and certainly there's a lot of scope for reform. And I think that's a place where Ireland could actually be pushing for reform rather than kind of deciding, well, let's throw the baby out with the bathwater and remove our legal commitments to the UN altogether. So
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate that. I'm just looking at a few more questions in the chat here. So, how is it feasible for us to use or action our constitution to prevent US aircraft from landing or refueling at Shannon Airport? I think, Mike, you might have touched on that a little bit. We can say a bit more if you want. What do you think? I think this question from Stephen is particularly pertinent. So, what do you think is driving the Irish government agenda to dismantle the triple lock, and why do they want to expose Ireland to the potential to be part of EU militarism? Niamh, I know you touched on that there in your point about the Irish establishment being quite embarrassed by the Irish people's commitment to peace and neutrality. Um, Again, for those who joined late, we commissioned a poll which Uplift members have chipped in for. 1,200 people answered our poll, and it was asking right across the spectrum, do you support Ireland's current position on neutrality? And 75% of people have said yes, we support Ireland's current position on neutrality. 17% said no, and 7% said unsure. And that majority carried right across all parties: Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, Labour, Soc Dems, Green Party, everybody. There is no government mandate for this, like you said, Mark, with the Nice Treaty and the Lisbon Treaty. Irish people have a strong commitment to neutrality, and our triple lock has been promised to us through those treaties. The government has no mandate to dismantle that. I'm just trying to check here. Is this an attempt to accomplish what? Okay.
Just to answer the question
Yeah.
about Bhriain, about the pressure, that point I made, that I drew attention to the WikiLeaks cables at the time of the Catholic workers' acquittal. That was a real insight into the behind the scenes pressure that politicians, and the same thing happened again when the American ambassador 2 weeks before the election recently came out and said, well, if you pass the Occupied Territories bill, I think the Ditch leaked it, I'm not sure who did, but there will be consequences. And Micheál Martin immediately came back and said, well, when we said we were going to pass the Occupied Territories bill, what we meant was we were going to look at it, or he made some Weasley kind of comment. And but the point was, the key thing we should take away was, why did he come out and say he was going to pass it? Because he was trying to get votes, because he knows that his policy is not popular. And they were trying to claw back some votes. And that's why Eamon Ryan announced last year he was going to inspect planes that might be going to taking weapons to Israel, because they were trying to secure their power, because they know the vast majority of people do not want us to be part of this. We can't, and that's why they passed the triple lock. Exactly the same reason. And we cannot allow them to make promises and then renege on them. If they're going to make promises, we have to get them to make promises, and then we have to get them to stick to them.
Maybe
Absolutely.
just to mention on the agenda, what's driving the agenda as well. I mean, the role of the arms companies and the arms lobby is really, really significant. And the arms companies have, they have access to the corridors of power in Brussels. And over the last, it's interesting, if you look at the European Union budget, the last budget line for 2014-2020, which is the first European budget that made available funding directly for arms companies for research and development of weapons. The budget that's in place now has made another massive amount of funding, 8 billion euros, is now directly going to arms companies for the research and development of weapons. The arms companies are influencing how policy is made. So the people, we have no influence over how policy is made in Brussels, or very, very, very slight influence. The European Parliament has very little, if any, power at all. But the arms companies are able to shape policy to their favour, and then when funds are announced that benefit arms companies, those same companies apply and they get, hundreds of millions of euros. So the arms company is driving an agenda in Brussels, and then that agenda is also then playing out in Ireland. And in Ireland now we actually have an arms lobby group set up in Dublin, in Ballsbridge, if I'm not mistaken. But there is an arms company, I can put the link in the chat, there is an arms lobby group now active in Dublin. One of the members is Lockheed Martin, which is the US, the biggest US arms company. Saab is another, but it's US and other arms companies operating out of Dublin to lobby the Irish government for solutions. They all, anywhere you see the word solution, it's definitely not a solution, because the arms companies always use this word, defense solutions. But what they actually mean is, build up a killing machine. So driving the agenda, there's an awful lot of money to be made from war. You can sit very comfortably in Ireland and invest and make an awful lot of money. Even if you just go to the arms company stock and you look at where arms value was, taking Rheinmetall as a German arms company. If you look at its value on the 6th of October, and then you look at it on the 9th of October, as the weekend after the 7th of October came to an end, the value had shot up. There's huge interest in keeping wars going. And then
Niamh,
like us become uncomfortable because we point that out,
I might just cut you off there. So I can see there's a couple more questions in the chat. I'm going to come to them at the end, and I see Bill, you have your hand raised as well. I want to take, while everyone's on the call here, I want to do a collective action. So we're all going to phone the head offices of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael's head office this right now. So I'm going to share with you the link and how we can do that and talk you through it. As I said, according to our polling, 75% of Irish people have said that they support our current position of neutrality, and that goes right across all political parties. So the government leaders in Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil who are forming a programme for government this week have no mandate to push this through. I'm just going to share my screen with you guys here again. Jacob, if you can put the link in the chat there, please. So the link will bring you to this page here. So it's a call action to protect Irish neutrality. If you put in your phone number here, so I've just put in 087 123 4567, but if you put in your real phone number here, you can do it on your laptop or you can do it on your mobile. And you click one of these call buttons, so either call Fine Gael or call Fianna Fáil head office. You will get a call back on your phone, so your phone will start ringing. Answer that call and you'll hear a recorded message from me. I'll just be talking you through what's about to happen. So I'll just say you're going to be put through to the Fine Gael head office or the Fianna Fáil head office. And here are some things you should mention about how it's important to protect the triple lock, how Irish people support our neutrality, and how the government doesn't have a mandate to change that. And there's also a written script here. So you can say, hi, my name is blank from whatever area of Ireland you're calling from. And here's some concerns that you have. So talking about, again, Irish neutrality. The 75% of people in Ireland want to maintain our neutrality. We want to keep the triple lock and Ireland's neutral status, and we want to see that in the programme for government and any new government formation talks. Again, if you're having trouble getting through on the tool here, so the tool will be free, it'll call you back for free, you don't have to spend any money. If you are having trouble, the actual phone numbers are down here at the bottom, you can just type those in as well. So Jacob, have you shared that link in the chat?
I did. I will be resharing just in case.
Perfect.
People keep texting.
Okay, I'll just stop my screen share here. If anyone has any questions on that, let me know. If not, please do start typing in your phone numbers and start making calls. We might just take a break for 5 minutes while people do that, and we'll come back then and we'll gather the last few questions and comments.
Hi everyone, Siobhan here. I had to join with my phone as my laptop died. And while you're making your phone calls, I just think it's really important that we remember that the next few days are really, really crucial. It looks like the programme for government will be agreed within the next 48 hours. Fine Gael are already planning their regional meetings to endorse it, and also Fianna Fáil are looking. It looks like we'll have their national meeting on Sunday. So the more we can put pressure on the people who are both attending those Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael members, because as Bhriain is able to show through our Ireland Thinks poll, we're able to show that there is disquiet and that there is differences of opinion within those main political parties. So the more we can reach those people who will be at those meetings, the better. And I suppose some of the ways we can do that are, one, the share action, the phone call action that many of you are doing right now will be in your inbox within the next hour. It's already, you'll be getting it today. We will be issuing a press release on that Ireland Thinks poll, which is literally news of today's news basically. So the more, and we'll be doing social media content on that. So the more we can share it and target Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil TDs, the better. But also, if anybody here, and I suspect a lot of you here are well used to writing letters to the papers, so I would really, really encourage you to pick up and do a very short letter to your local paper. I think that's what we need, and echoed by both Niamh and Mark. What we need are TDs understanding that their constituency, their voters, are putting pressure on them, and the best way of doing that is through their local media. So please just take a minute. You can use the script that you're looking at right now that Jacob just shared just write a quick letter to your local paper. It's actually, today's the best day because a lot of them are published later on in the week and need the deadlines would be today and tomorrow. So there are some of the things that we really need to really pile the pressure on. I think this conversation, I think there's about 119 or 120 people on this call. If every one of us did some of these actions, there's no doubt, I have no doubt that would be noted, registered, and it would be taken account of in the negotiations. The thing what we're actually hoping for is that they don't, they're not watering down the triple lock, but that they're actually recognize that it's such a political hot potato for them that they back away from it in the triple lock. If we are in their program for government, if we can manage to achieve that by the end of the week, it's going to make it even doubly harder for them to water it down in, once that program for government is agreed. So I know there's lots of we could debate. I can see somebody comments about the local papers and all that, but actually, don't let that hold you back. All the pressure. If there's enough pressure, there's a good chance that papers and TDs will respond in some way. And even if they don't, you mightn't ever hear about it. It will be noted. We know this through experience that very often you think it's falling on deaf ears. Guaranteed, it's not. It's not behind closed doors. So Bhriain, I'm going to hand it back to you. Yeah.
That's great, thanks. I can see people on the phones here on my screen, which is brilliant. I am going to just start running back through the last couple of questions and then give Niamh and Mark a chance to give their closing comments. Jacob, if you can just re-add Mark as a co-host there. I think he dropped off for a second. Yeah, some good points here from Neil Michael in the Irish Examiner talking about the large increase in spending on attack helicopters by the Irish government recently. There's questions here which I think, Niamh, are worth addressing around what is the risk to Ireland of invasion or attack, and should we be part of some sort of an alliance? Are we reliant too much on the UK for defence and things like that? I think it's worth just addressing those. Also the points around the undersea cables that obviously those run all around the world through every country and through international waters, and the idea that you could have the Irish Army defending the entire Atlantic Ocean right across international waters is a ridiculous argument. But I know that undersea cables is something people don't know a lot about, and it sounds technical and it scares them off. But again, it's a bit of a smokescreen argument. And then a good question here from Mary Hanlon: Is it putting Ireland's safety at risk to have US military planes and weapons landing at Shannon? Does it make Ireland a target, I guess? Again, the questions around Ireland's defence spending and the increase in spending on attack helicopters and fighter jets. Legitimate questions around is there a threat to Ireland's defence, and are we reliant on the UK too much or overly reliant? Should we have some military alliances in place? And then also questions around undersea cables and is it even feasible to defend undersea cables that every country has that go all around the world through international waters? I don't know, Niamh or Mark, if either of you want to come in on any of those questions, and also if you want to make any closing statements or comments. We have about 10 minutes left.
Will I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Niamh.
Okay. Yeah, maybe just on the question of, is Ireland at risk, and maybe we should be increasing our defence spending, and maybe our neutrality isn't the way to go. To respond on that, I think our neutrality has served us very well. We're one of the safest places in the world, and often the pushback on that is, well, look at where you're geographically located. You're not next to Russia, blah blah blah. But if you look at Finland and Sweden, well, they are next to Russia. They were neutral for years, and their neutrality served them very well. I think neutrality, in particular, as a small nation like Ireland, we will never have the capacity to defend ourselves. If Russia decides that they want to go after us, Russia's a nuclear power. If the US decides it wants to come for us, it's also a nuclear power. We're never going to be able to actually, if we get into that game, that we need to actually increase military spending in order and build up our military capacity in order to be able to defend ourselves, then you're looking at spending billions and trillions of dollars in order to kind of play catch up on the other military powers. We're a very small nation. defending ourselves militarily would be absolutely catastrophic. We would be wiped out. So our best defense is to not become involved in a war in the first place. And the best way of doing that is to remain neutral. And I think that, our neutrality has served us well. That argument has borne out for many decades. In terms of the cables, of course, it would be completely impossible for the Irish Marine Force or Navy to be able to patrol all cables everywhere in Irish waters. But we also shouldn't need to do so if, again, coming back to the point of neutrality, if we maintain our neutrality, if we operate within maritime law, our cables technically then shouldn't actually be attacked. And if they are attacked, then we have a multilateral organization like the United Nations, where we can take the attack and we can raise it within a multilateral space for discussion. That's what the UN is made for. If for example, the example that was made, there was a cable damaged in Finland. It was just treated as a criminal matter. It's like after 9/11, suddenly we started, all over the world bringing in terrorism legislation, when actually a lot of the violence that occurred could have been dealt with very quickly in the criminal legal codes. We don't need to operate outside of the legal codes that exist. Is it putting Ireland at risk? I mean, again, I live in the Netherlands, where, from where I am sitting right now, there's US nuclear warheads about 90 kilometers from where I'm sitting right now in the Netherlands. That makes me feel very much at risk. And I think if you have, US planes going through Shannon, then that does make Ireland a target. If if US military is using an airspace in Ireland, that definitely makes us a target. So I think the triple lock is really the baseline. We have to be strengthening our neutrality as opposed to weakening it and hollowing it out. Maybe just on closing remarks, because I think this is my last intervention, I think. I think there's an awful lot of media pressure against people like us who are calling for peace. And I think it's just important, because they can really try and get inside your head, and you think, oh my God, well, actually, maybe I'm wrong in this, and maybe I should be calling for the Irish Army to be, equipped further, and maybe we should be joining NATO. I think it's important to remember always, there's nothing controversial about saying no to war. And I think we are made to feel like we are somehow inhibiting this greater move to kind of protect Europe as a whole, and that Ireland is an outlier and we should be ashamed of ourselves and embarrassed and we're a nuisance. All we're saying is no to war, yes to peace. We don't want any part of the warmongering, any part of the war frenzy. And we want to maintain our neutrality as a tool for doing that. And that should not be a source of embarrassment. It should be a source of pride. And we've seen how, I think Michael D. Higgins is a perfect example of a very highly educated man who knows what he's talking about. And when he speaks his mind, they come after him, because he has all of the arguments, and the arguments are on his side. So to people, if you are going out into the world after this and you're, arguing for the protection of the triple lock, peace, neutrality, all of that, I think it's just important to remember that, because the powers that be, in this capitalist system, make an awful lot of money from war. And so we're really taking a challenge to the system. So I'll leave it at that, Bhriain, I think.
Thanks very much. Mark, do you want to make any closing comments or any responses?
Very quick, just a couple of lines here I've written. People who tried to get Ireland involved, this is following on something Niamh just said. People who tried to get Ireland involved in wars always claimed to be fighting just wars. This is exactly the same as for centuries, back to Wolfe Tone, back to 1790. We need to demand UN peacekeepers, not EU battle groups. We need to demand that we stop allowing the US to use Shannon Airport for military purposes and carry out inspections for weapons on planes passing through or overflying Ireland, which is required under the Air Navigation Acts. We know about what we the people think, which is why Micheál Martin announced 2 weeks before the recent election that they would pass the OTP if elected, and why Eamon Ryan announced inspections of planes suspected of taking weapons to Israel, and why they promised the triple lock in the first place. We can't allow them to back down on their promises, like Martin did when the US ambassador made threats. We have to remind them that they are accountable to us. Now is the time for a concerted campaign to protect Irish neutrality and the triple lock. It's not enough that they make promises. We need to get them to keep them. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark. I just want to share one document in the group chat here, which is a policy brief which Niamh wrote, which explains a lot of the myths around the triple lock and how to counter them. So again, the myths of why we might need to make changes to our neutrality and why that's nonsense. Again, just want to give one final share to the poll that got the results of just an hour ago, which again showed that this is Niamh's document here with the introduction to the triple lock and some of the dispelling the myths. But yeah, just to share the results of that poll again, that 75% of people in Ireland have said that they support Ireland's current policy on neutrality. 17% said that they may look to see a change, and 7% said they were not sure. So again, vast majority of Irish people across all ages, all regions, all political parties want to see Irish neutrality maintained and want to see the triple lock maintained, because that is our best protection to our neutrality. Again, if you prepare for war, you'll get war. If you prepare for peace, you'll get peace. And we do need the Irish government to be a strong voice pushing for peace at this time, and not to be sucked into the warmongering and the profit-driven motives behind the war industry. Mark, I think you have your hand up there. Do you want to come in for one last?
Yeah, could you share the peacekeepers, not battle groups?
Oh yeah, sorry. The one thing I promised to share.
I desperately tried to plug this slogan. I just think this is the core message: peacekeepers, not battle groups. I think we just keep hammering on this. Maybe if you show the graphic now. Can you share the graphic now?
Is my screen? Oh, sorry, I thought I was sharing my screen. Let me.
We could just share this on social media. If we can just try and get this up to people, to try and oppose the UN system to this new system, which is actually promoted. This EU system is promoted by the arms companies. I mean, explicitly, EADS, now Airbus, boasting about the European Defence Agency and so on. We have to work with the UN and try to get it to work again.
Yeah, again, I think it's important to note that the UN it has its flaws, but it is the closest thing we have to kind of a global democracy system. And Ireland has no business being involved in wars that doesn't have the mandate of the UN. Again, it would be similar to things like the war in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan. We would have no business going in there, and we don't want to see that happen. Irish people have a strong reputation abroad. Our passport is one of the most valuable passports in the world, because we are not seen as the enemy in any country. We're not in the history books as having invaded anybody. Our role should be as neutral peacekeepers, and that's where we can have a real impact in bringing an end to wars through diplomacy. Here are some of the groups that are worth following as well. So Action Against War, again, Uplift is our own group. Peace and Neutrality Alliance, or PANA, AFRI, Action from Ireland, the Irish Anti-War Movement, and also the Irish Neutrality League. We'll share this on socials along with some notes around today's call, and also the poll results which we saw earlier, and a few other points. Thanks again to everyone. It's really heartening to see hundreds and hundreds of people sign up for a very niche topic. But again, as we've seen, the vast majority of Irish people take pride in our neutrality and support it. We'll share the link through an email again to that phone action. Please do call up. We know it makes a difference when their phones ring off the hook. They take notice. And right now, when we can see that there's a divide in the parties and that the programme for government talks are coming to a head, it really is the best time that we can strike with this. So please do take the actions, and check your inbox for more updates. And well done to everybody for joining today. We'll see you again soon.